Thank you all so much for being with us tonight for Social Transformation, Poetry in Prisons, Unions, Elementary Schools, and the Streets, which we're presenting tonight in honor of National Poetry Month and also as the start of a new series here at Writers and Books called On Purpose, which aims to build bonds between literary artists, instructors, activists, and organizers across disciplines. We're trying to amplify successful literary advocacy efforts wherever they're happening and to inform and educate our audience about the unique ability of the literary arts to strengthen community, practice social solidarity, and imagine a more just world. So for those of you who are new to us, my name is Tyler Barton. I'm the artistic director here at Writers and Books. We are a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. Since 1981, we've been offering readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. We also have an independent bookstore, Ampersand Books, where you can find all the books discussed tonight and many more. You can find more information on our website at wab.org. And throughout the evening, I'll be putting things in the chat, links to different books that are discussed on the Ampersand website. I think that I'm just thrilled to have this lineup with us tonight. We're going to hear from Joseph Bruchac, who has been either teaching, publishing, and advocating for imprisoned writers for over 50 years. Joe is the poet laureate of Saratoga Springs and the author of just about every kind of book you can imagine. He's truly a legendary literary citizen, and we are lucky to have him with us tonight. After Joe introduces himself, we'll hear from Lorraine Garnett. She is a poet, nanny, and published member of the Worker Writers School. I first saw Lorraine's poems when they were projected on the side of a grain silo in Buffalo a few summers ago, some haikus that she'd made. And I quickly bought my own copy of Coronavirus Haiku, which I'm sure we'll talk about more tonight. And it's kind of my entryway into a lot of the work and the ideas we're discussing. So speaking of the Worker Writers School, we also have Mark Nowak, who founded that program and has led writing workshops with unions across America and the world. His book, Social Poetics, puts language, scholarship, and a clear framework to a lot of the ideas we'll discuss tonight about the power and potential for writing workshops to build solidarity and help create the future we deserve. So we also have Matt Shaw joining us from South Carolina, where he has for many years been working weekly with unhoused writers to draft, edit, produce, print, and distribute Speak Up Mag, the sales of which go directly back to the writers it publishes. And we also have Barbara Strasko, is a mentor of mine who has been leading poetry workshops with youth and urban elementary schools in Lancaster, PA for decades, and has been a leader behind Poetry Paths, an annual anthology and reading for young people. And lastly, we're joined by Michael Torres, who is a kick-ass poet and instructor with the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. Michael's essay in American Precariat, which is this great collection of essays from Coffee House Press. It's a moving meditation on how some of our most lauded institutions fail working class people and contribute to the plague of mass incarceration. So I'm really excited about this panel. We're going to hear from all of them here in a second. Without any more introduction, I'm going to turn to each of these speakers. They'll tell us about their work, what they do, the people their work serves, and how they understand impact or success. Then we'll open up questions to the group, which I will offer for anyone to take. And then we'll have each of our presenters share an example exercise and or an example piece of writing that came from one of those exercises. And lastly, we'll have some room for audience questions. So again, put those in the chat if you have them or use the question and answer feature. Now I'm going to turn over to Joe Bruchac to talk about his work. Thanks.
Sego, as my Haudenosaunee friends would say. Kwai ni dobak. Hello, my friends, as we'd say in the Abenaki language. My name is Joe Bruchac, and Luisi Soza Paranoki da Hozid. My name is Joseph, or the Peaceful One. That's my Onondaga name, given me by one of the clan mothers about 40 years ago. And as a writer and a storyteller, for some reason, I've always been interested in those people who are forgotten or not really looked at through the wide lens of society. While I was at Cornell University as a student and undergraduate, I was involved in poetry readings against the Vietnam War with Robert Bly, one of my mentors and friends. I was a marcher on Washington. I marched with Martin Luther King in the South. And then in 1966, after I graduated, I went to West Africa for 3 years as a volunteer teacher in Ghana. Also was in Nigeria during the Nigerian Civil War, where I made friends with people such as Chinua Achebe, who became a very dear friend, was on my PhD committee. I'm mentioning all this because by the time I got back to the States in 1969, I was already convinced that so much of the literary world was blind. They weren't seeing the work of people, supposedly people of color, we're all colored, of people who come from other backgrounds, of women, of indigenous people all around the world, of African Americans, and of people in prison. So when I got back to the States with my wife's help, I started a little magazine called the Greenfield Review. I used a little money I'd been given for a readjustment allowance to bring out the first issue. And shortly after that, we brought out our first book. It was a collection of poetry and essays and articles and pictures smuggled out of Soledad Prison by William Witherup, a poet from the West Coast. It was our first book, Words from the House of the Dead, our first publication. It was followed in the years after that, by more than 15 other books by people who were incarcerated. And the year after that came out, I began teaching creative writing workshops at Great Middle Correctional Facility, where I put together my first anthology uh, of books, of poems called The Last Stop. In addition, my wife and I founded something called the Cosmic Prison Writers Project, where we took donated books and literary magazines and sent them free to prison inmates all around the continent, including in Canada. And one of the people who received books from us was a man named Jimmy Santiago Baca, who is now known as one of America's great poets. But he was in prison. He did not read or write at the time. He literally taught himself to read and began writing poetry, created a new person from himself, and was released from prison and became eventually well known as a writer himself. And A Place to Stand is the name of his autobiography, and also a film about his life where I have a few words to say in it. I won't say more, except to say that our Greenfield Review Press has been a major force in publishing what's now called multicultural literature before the term was being used. We published anthologies of African writing, Native American writing, Asian American writing, Caribbean writing in English, and other things, as well as individual writers' books. And I'm a writer myself and a storyteller, but we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about those we often forget, and I'm remembered far too often these days. So I'll leave it at that and turn it over to someone else.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to throw to Lorraine now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you, Tyler. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Lorraine Garnett, and I'm a nanny. I work in Brooklyn at the moment, and I started writing poetry. Poetry is fairly new to me. I started writing poetry in 2017, and how that came about is I was walking by the public library, and there was a flyer that said, they needed nannies to sign up to write fairy tales, and I just figured that would be something that I could do. It was conducted by Martin Nowak, the director and founder of the Workers Writers School. So I signed up. The work and writing workshop um, was for 4 weeks, if I remember correctly, was for 4 weeks and hour and a half session. And at the end, there was a presentation. That was my first time in any kind of group. There was there was a closing ceremony, and we were asked to present our fairy tale. So we all did, and it was very exciting. I invited my boss, the children that I work with, my friends, my family, and they came with flowers. So my head was sold on, and the fairy tale that I wrote was well received. And from there, Mark asked me if I would become a member of the Workers Writers School, and which I did. And it's been a really wonderful ride, from that time. So I'm just excited. At times I have this, what they call it, imposter syndrome, I think, because I'm still learning. There's just so much to to learn in the form of poetry. We have done uh, like we started, I mean, from since I started focusing on the Japanese short poems, we started first with the tanko, which is, and that was difficult for us and for me actually, really at the beginning, not knowing, not have been into this before. So we did the tanko, which is uh, 31 syllables, 5 lines. And, we did it. And we actually, I remember Davidson Garrison, he really loved that. And I became to love that too. And then Mark came again with another form of poetry, which was the haiku, which 3 lines, 17 syllables, and it was hard to make the transition, but we did, and majority of us really liked the that format, and I could really say that's one of my favorite poetry form just like now, because we were fortunate to be able to. It's not that we're just in a workshop, and by the way, the workshop, it's such a community. It's unbelievable. We all like and we're like family. We really enjoy ourselves being there. And we are so fortunate to be on the stage. We had a presentation with Sonia Sanchez. We're on the stage with Sonia Sanchez. So we were also elated. And her book, Morning Haiku, which she has a poem, which is my favorite, one of my favorite from her, Morning Haiku. And I just to show the audience, hi audience, just to show you how privileged we are that we were on that stage with Sonia Sanchez. This is her book, Morning Haiku, and this is from Maya Angelou, that she said this about Sonia reviewing the book, I think. Sonia Sanchez is a lion in literature's forest. When she writes, she roars. And when she sleeps, other creatures walk gingerly. So, I mean, it's just amazing what the caliber of people that we are, the Workers Writers School, are able to go around, to be around and learn from, and just like soaking up everything. And I just read her, one of my favorite from her is, let me wear the day well, so when it reaches you, you will enjoy it. Isn't that beautiful? That's just
Thank you,
awesome.
Lorraine. That's beautiful. Yes, excellent. Let's turn to Mark now and hear a little bit more about the Worker Writers.
Thanks, Tyler. Hello, everybody out there. I see that there's some Worker Writer School members in there. Hi, Keely, Davidson, Leslie, Tom, out in the audience. And it's great to do this event. Thanks, Tyler. My first job out of grad school was working at Writers and Books, teaching with Joe Flaherty, who I love. And so it's great to kind of virtually be back. Lorraine said a lot about the Worker Writer School already, but I don't know, for some reason when I get on these Zooms, I feel like I get into like show and tell mode. So I first off want to just give a shout out to Joe Bruchac and Greenfield Review, who's done like incredible work for decades in this area. Joe came out to our Worker Writer School retreat as a guest poet and taught a workshop. It was a kind of beautiful afternoon. Two of the questions I think about a lot with this work is how we study it and how we circulate it, right? There's a lot of models that are out there, and I'm always looking at kind of new ones. Of course, I wrote this big 300-page tome, Social Poetics, that's kind of a history of writing workshops in the community, kind of starting in the late 1960s. One of the things I noticed is that every time there's kind of a big social movement, revolutionary moment, whether it's the Watts Writers Workshop that emerges out of Los Angeles in the late 1960s, 60s, whether it's the anti-apartheid struggles and the trade union movements that happened then, whether it's the New York City teacher strike and June Jordan's workshop. There always seems to be a link between these things, between social movements, social activism, and the poetry workshop. So I try to kind of lay that out a little bit in that book. I was also really interested in, I've done a lot of work around Attica. The book that we got reprinted was Celeste Tisdale's When the Smoke Cleared, Attica Prison Poems and Journals, which is a expanded edition of a book that came out from his Celeste did the very first Black Arts Movement workshop in a prison at Attica after the uprising. And so we worked together for about 2 or 3 years to take that original edition published by Dudley Randall's Broadside Press in Detroit and bring it back into this kind of contemporary moment, thanks to Duke University Press. One of the things that's great about that book, I think, the poems are fantastic. My introduction is so-so, but it's Celeste. He kept a journal when he was going to Attica, right? And we don't always get like what it's like to be a teacher in these workshops. So I think that educationally, that's a really great book. I also have an essay in this book called The Political Uses of Literature that studies all the kind of ways that poetry publications, here's just a picture from it, that poetry publications came out in like every group that was organizing, whether it was like the Attica Brothers Prison Defense Fund, whether it was different groups of lawyers and activists around Attica. There was also a picture there of the book Joe mentioned, The Last Stop, Writing from Comstock, when some of the Attica incarcerated writers were transferred to the prison that Joe was working at. There's another copy of it. Thank you for showing it up. So I'm really interested in all of those ways in which we kind of study this work, because it, that Celeste book was out of print for 30 years before we brought it back into print. And it's just astonishing to me that this anthology that happened from the workshops right after Attica could have been out of print for so long. So those are a couple things. We, of course, did the coronavirus haiku book, but one of the things about that is, in addition to this anthology, we kept working, finding ways to get the work out there in various ways. So we collaborated with the Dia Art Foundation for several years on several projects. One of them was turning one of the haiku written by Christine Lewis, who's a leader of Domestic Workers United, the organization that organized for the first Bill of Rights for domestic workers anywhere in the United States. It happened in New York City. And the poem she wrote, we turned into an old kind of glass tubing neon sign. So the haiku was actually a large neon that is now up in the front window of the Worker Justice Center of New York, in Kingston, New York, near where I live. And finally, the last project, and I'll end on this, and pictures of these things are all up on the Worker Writer School Instagram page. So if people want to take a look at them, is that Dia liked this first project, and I was really interested in light as a projection publishing mechanism. You had mentioned, Tyler, seeing the haiku on the grain silos in Buffalo. That was kind of one early version of it. And so Dia said, is there somewhere you would like to see these poems be published? And I was like, well, I'd love to. I remember being in the Occupy Wall Street marches, and when we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, there was a projection while we were marching of the 99% on the huge Verizon building. And when it went up, there were these huge cheers. And so I was like, can we find the person who did that? And they said, yes, we know who it is. It's the Illuminator. And they said, well, where do you want to project the poems? And I said, well, it'd be cool to project them on the Brooklyn Bridge, right? What's more iconic in New York City than the Brooklyn Bridge? So poems by Lorraine and Keeley and Davidson, who are in this event, Tom and others, wrote poems. We figured out how to do all the permits. We got the people from the Occupy Wall Street protests, loaded up our poems and projected them and did a reading on the Brooklyn Bridge. I think it's just like unique new ways of getting this work, really important work that everybody on this panel is doing, out there into the public. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was lovely. Next, we're going to hear from Matt Shaw from Speak Up.
Yeah, so I'm in a city of about 75,000 in South Carolina, just south of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I have been working with people facing homelessness, which I will call homeless because that's what they call themselves, for about the last 15 years. But we are very new to the the writing workshop, writing community journey. So we just actually celebrated the 1 year anniversary of a weekly writing community. And I've been calling it a writing workshop. That's how it's been advertised, but I realized it's a writing community. It's become so much more. Actually, people talk about it using words like family. Um, so I'm just gonna pull people kind of right into what it's like to be in the Speak Up Writing workshop, or the Speak Up Writing community. So we started this about a year ago. It's at the local public library in one of their large meeting rooms. Um, it's advertised, open to the public, but aimed at people facing homelessness. Folks come in, they get good coffee and donuts, pens and notebooks are provided. And then I invite people to choose from one of 3 writing prompts. We write for about 10 minutes on one of the prompts, and then those who would like to can read their piece aloud. Nobody ever has to share, but people are invited to do that. Every time somebody reads, we applaud, and then we write again, read again. Those who want to applaud, we do that 3 times. So that's it. It's incredibly simple. And it has been remarkable to watch what's happened over the last year. Initially, it was just sometimes myself and one other lady, 70 years old, Black. Sometimes it was just the 2 of us, and it was a delight and an honor to get together with her and write. And then after a few months, there were about 4 of us, and then last fall there were 10 of us, and now there's 15 to 20 of us who are gathering on a weekly basis. And I think for me, it's very much been a journey of discovering what the value of this writing community actually is. I mean, I think initially I thought out of this people would be published and speak up. We've published a magazine for over a decade, 90 printed issues, but I've really come to recognize that it's not about publication for people. It's about the experience of writing together. It's about being known, being heard, knowing other people. And really, it's an opportunity for people, many of them living in the shelter, living on the streets, for them to simply be human together. And one of the things that happened early on, we advertised this as being for people who are homeless, but this one guy kept coming who's not homeless. I thought, that's really interesting. He wants to be here. He's not homeless. And then he wrote one day and shared about a dark moment in his life where he was on the verge of suicide. And this lady currently on the streets just broke down in tears crying. And she said, we feel so alone out here, but hearing you, who I thought had it all together, share about this makes me feel so accepted and not alone. And so now we have about 1/3 non-homeless, 2/3 homeless. And the dynamic that sometimes happens is people are writing, they're sharing. We'll have somebody who's not homeless, as they're reading their piece, break down in tears, and a homeless person goes over to them and brings them tissue and rubs their back. And it's this tremendously empowering exchange that happens. Tyler, I don't know where I'm at with time.
I think that's a great place for right
Yeah.
now. So excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. Next, I'm going to turn to Barbara Strasko.
Hi. Yeah, so as Tyler talked about, I was the poet in the schools in Lancaster City for the whole school district of Lancaster. So I went into classrooms in all the different grades, as many as I could. But I worked in that program for about 10 years. And that was after I retired from the school district where I had worked for 35 years. So just to give you an idea of how, and that was sponsored, the Poet in the Schools program was sponsored by Franklin and Marshall College with a grant, which was really fantastic because I finally was able to be in the schools and only teach poetry. And that was quite a gift. So, but I first started teaching poetry in the 70s as a Title I teacher in low socioeconomic schools. Title I is a federally funded program, which I think they're talking about cutting. And we had a program set up for kids who were below level and also or had social and emotional issues. So I started teaching poetry to them, and they were kind of like non-readers to some extent, some of them. So I would have them dictate their poems to me, and I would write them for them, and then have them, learn to read them back to me, and we shared them. We used to have part of what we were mandated to do was to have parent and child workshops. So we bring the parents in. So right from the beginning of I was always involved with the community and the parents. And so later I became a guidance counselor in the schools, and I used poetry to help kids heal. And so I was able to, we had an AIDS epidemic, AIDS and drug epidemic in the 80s. And so a lot of my students, actually, parents had died of AIDS. And so I know one student, I ended up using my counseling sessions to help her learn to read, because I just felt it was really important. And we started doing little small poems, and she finally wrote a poem to put on her mother's grave, which was really important to her. But also just the idea of teaching her to read, I felt like it sort of helped her feel more grounded, because, you open a book and the same words are there, the words mean the same things. And yeah, so that was really kind of important. And then also I guess it was a little bit later, I wrote a poem myself about a drive-by shooting. A high school student was killed in a drive-by shooting, and on an elementary playground in the evening. And some of my students were there, and I ended up just writing a poem about that. And it was actually the first poem that I ever published. And so and I read it in Mexico at a poetry workshop in San Miguel. And Robert Haas, who was poet laureate at the time, and Yusuf Komunyakaa were there. And so we started corresponding, because Yusuf had been a poet in the schools at one time. And also Robert Haas literacy was his thing when he was poet laureate. So, uh-oh. Oh, okay. Something happened. Okay. So in the late 90s, am I doing something?
No, we
Okay.
can hear you fine. You're good.
Okay, good. Okay. In the late 90s, I decided to go back to being a reading specialist. And it was that's when I really started doing poetry on a larger scale in the schools. And I tried to get all the kids, every student in the school, to write a poem at some point during the school year. And then we had a big event where they read the poems in their classrooms. And, then we would go to the auditorium, and there would be 50 or 60 kids reading their poems. We had music, dance, a whole big thing. So, and we published a book, and which was kind of the same model that we used when I became poet in the schools. Although in the Poet in the Schools program, I was able to I took the kids on a lot of field trips and had them write with their notebooks, right where we were. And I tried to get them to appreciate things that we had in the community, like the river we have Thaddeus Stevens here. He was an abolitionist. We studied him, things like that. So Yeah, so I think that probably tells you pretty much some of my students, oh, this is what I forgot to talk about. Some of my students, a lot of my students actually uh have used their poetry. One is had her poem put on the city bus as an adult now, and she's also on the Poet Laureate committee with me. I have a couple other students that have been doing things, and I often run into students who just, tell me that they, they're just, uh, their poems, how much it meant to them. I ran into, we have the farmers market here. I don't know if anybody's been to Lancaster, but, um, and I looked over and this young Black man was staring at me, and I said, "Do I know you?" And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I do know you." And he said, "I wrote a poem about snow." And um, we talked about, as soon as he said it, I knew exactly who he was, and we talked for a long time. And so he's a truck driver at night, but he has sent me some poems recently. So anyway, that's kind of I had some students. Oh, I forgot about this. I had some students who ended up winning River of Words. Robert Haas had a contest for kids, and it was called River of Words. And a couple of my students, some of whom were homeless, won the awards. And they were able to go to Washington, D.C. for like 4 or 5 days and read at the Library of Congress. So that was really quite amazing. And I got to go and witness the whole thing. And it was very, moving to see them. And they had to read their poems. And it was very, very rewarding. So some of those students, I might read one of them later. So,
Great.
okay, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara.
Sure.
Lastly, we're going to hear from Michael, and then we'll jump to some group questions.
Hi, so I teach with the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, and the teachers or the teaching artists teach at all the state facilities, the state correctional facilities for adults in Minnesota. Um, our students are all the inmates in those prisons. I've taught in Faribault at the men's prison there, and Shakopee at the women's prison before. And I run mostly poetry workshops. I've done nonfiction workshops. I teach them much like I would teach a workshop at a university. And I've recently uh, taught a course on like flash across genre. So like the really, really short story, flash nonfiction and prose poetry. That was really fun.
Mhm.
And I would say like to the question of like, um, how do I view success or impact? I think all of the MPWW, the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop courses are not credit. They're not linked to any sort of degree. And so for me, it's like I view success as like students that just keep coming back and like want to, because like the classes that we have, because they're considered enrichment, they're all set in like in the evening after our students' day of work or schooling is done. So some of these people are getting up at like 4 in the morning to go to work, and they can, after they eat supper, they can go back to their cell and finish off their night, but they want to come. And so for me, like when I get students that continually come, that's in part like enough of it to seem like we're doing something successful. There are other things that we do. There's a mentorship program that we have. When a student finishes their first course, they can apply to get into that. And it's kind of like the way like a pen pal works, but they get to exchange work with a writer that is sort of employed or that volunteers for the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. There are lit magazine opportunities. MPWW has their own annual journal. There's what else do we have? The I think almost every prison in which we teach in the state has its own collective, so its own sort of like creative writing club that they sort of meet. I think about once a month. I don't know, after the pandemic thing sort of got thrown about, but so they have that, and that's like really great for students to not only stay connected uh beyond like the classroom, but also to get to get new students in and new people in the club. There's the Penn Prison Writing Award that happens annually that we've had students of ours submit to and win. Uh, yeah, I think that's probably mainly um, how I think. I mean, because I think coming from you get a lot of students. I get a lot of students like who because of like how they grew up and where they grew up. A lot of it comes down to like I think we'll talk about this too later about like trusting someone that's leading you through a workshop. And to me, the most um what I get most out of is when I get a student who I've had in a different class and they want to keep continuing their sort of artistic journey with MPWW. That's really something that I get like excited about. Yeah, I think that's what I got.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. I'm gonna switch us here to gallery view so everyone can be seen and just throw out a question about audience. So I'm interested in how you approach the question of audience with your writers. Uh, People who are in your workshops, do they have an idea of who they are writing for? Do you encourage them to imagine an audience or kind of a purpose or event for their writing besides self-reflection or self-expression? I don't know. Feel free to take that question in any direction, but wondering about what students are thinking about audience and how you kind of guide that. Anyone can jump in on that. Go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
I always tell people when I'm doing a writing workshop to write first for yourself. To write for yourself the things that you might not say any other time, in any other situation. And I've had a lot of women and men in the prisons I've worked with, and I've done this in more than 30 states over the years, say that when they are writing, they are not in prison and they can go wherever their mind takes them. So, in that sense, I think of writing as liberation as well as expression. And it's very much for yourself. And it's a benefit when others read it too, which makes it even more of a gift.
Excellent. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, similarly, I told students to imagine that they're writing to like either a friend or someone who would like understand them in sort of the language that they naturally speak and know. Because I did have a student once who, in the beginning of the semester, said that he was taking the class, but he said he didn't feel comfortable writing poetry, that he didn't think he was a poet. When I asked why, he said because he didn't know big words. And then I had to like sort of like back us up and talk about like, speaking and using poetry to like have these sort of using a conversational tone and that and like so then I came up with this like or then they came to me like to tell them to like just write as if you're speaking to someone who would understand you and wouldn't ask you like to give them bigger words, right? And so that was I think helpful in also like earning their trust and like that I wouldn't like say to them like or let them think that what they have written is not poetry.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think for us it's a little different because, of course, everybody in our group are taxi drivers and Starbucks baristas and home health workers, etc. So ours is very event focused, as you probably guessed from my early thing. But we've done all kinds of things, like I did a workshop with migrant farm workers up here in upstate with the Worker Justice Center of New York. And then we just drove people down to New York City and we did a pop-up reading in the Union Square Farmers Market. And I was a little worried, because people who worked on a farm, their employer was selling at the farmer's market, but they very happily stood up on a overturned apple crate and read their poems at that event. In another workshop, we worked with people at RISE, Immigrant and Refugee Resource Center in Albany, New York, and got a bus and brought them down to Brooklyn for a reading and walked along the promenade and saw the Statue of Liberty. We've been doing a lot of May Day events. The projection on the Brooklyn Bridge was on May Day. This coming up on May Day, International Workers' Day, we're doing an event at the Maceless Documentary Center in Harlem, the Film Center. So ours are kind of like, we've kind of focused it like a school year. We start in September, October. We write and write and write every month until May. April's National Poetry Month, but May Day is kind of our day at the Worker Writer School, International Workers' Day. So we kind of focus on that for opportunities.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I was just thinking, with me in the classroom, the students just read to each other and they're just so excited and they feel like they're so shocked that they can actually do this, and that they come up with the things that they do, that it's more like a celebration in a way of, what they've written, and they all applaud each other. And they're not even thinking about anything beyond that. But then later we do end up having an event, and a book and all that. But in the beginning, it's just that they're not given much of an opportunity in the schools, unfortunately, to do anything like that. Which I forgot to talk about, that I started a Saturday program for that very reason. At some point, because I noticed the kids who were really into it. I knew I was, as a poet in the schools, I might not see them again for a long time or ever. So I started a Saturday program.
Lovely. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of the folks that are writing in our writing community are coming in, and they have a very strong sense of powerlessness. They have a strong sense that they don't have a voice. They have a strong sense that their voice isn't valid, that nobody wants to hear it. And so a lot of the writing is upending that sense of powerlessness, and it's for them, but it's sometimes they're writing to people who are in the grave. One of the prompts we've invited people into is write a letter to someone who's wronged you, or write a letter of forgiveness, or write about injustice that you've experienced. And so in that, they're taking ownership of their story. It's very much for them, but sometimes there's an object of their piece that they're aiming it at that's very personal.
I wonder, Lorraine, when you're writing poetry, are you picturing someone that you're writing to, or are you usually writing for the event that's coming up, like Mark was saying? And just unmute for me, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's a bit of both because first I would say, like, one of the things that Mark instilled in us is that, we are our own storytellers. We have our own narrative, and we're able to write. Because I couldn't believe that I could write. A lot of the people in the group, or some are poets and been writing a long time, and some are not. But Mark just give us this comfort, as Matt had said before. He where he when he started the workshop, it's like a community and like a family, and that's what we also have. We have a community, and Mark gave us this inspiration that we can do it all. So it's just really wonderful. And you discovered, I started, it was my second, I remember my second workshop, second time doing poetry. And when I discovered that the F-bomb could be used in poetry, I was alarmed. My mouth dropped. It was Stead Goldman, one of the member. He was reading and he read, and I was in awe. So thereafter, so this is all new to me. So thereafter, I just started to think about all the people that have done me wrong. And so my writing just included just that F-bomb. I would read the first one to you. And I have evolved. And I must say that, the F-bomb have nothing to do with Martin Ork. So nothing to do with him. It was just Ted. So the first, and this was a tanker that I wrote, and I'm learning from the group and from Mark. And the first one I did was, have you seen my man? He left to visit his mom. It's been 5 years since. Where the hell could he have gone? The motherfucker is missing. So, but as I say, I have evolved and a little bit more careful because I got a call from my mother. This was like later on about the language. Sometime I would post something on, on the internet. And so I am very careful.
Mm,
She said,
yeah.
that's how I raised you. So
Thank you for sharing that, Lorraine. And that seems to go in the direction of what Michael was saying too about students realizing that you can write in your own voice, that you don't have to assume the imagined persona of a writer, whatever that is in your mind, that you can, and often your writing is going to be the best and is going to be received the best when you're writing in your own personal voice and your own vernacular, using words that you would use. Yeah, so that was lovely to hear. I'm going to ask another group question here about content of the writing. So I want to hear some people talk about how social issues have found their way into their writers' work. So, Barbara, I know you've mentioned this a little bit with very much addressing head-on social issues like a neighborhood shooting in your own work. But working in schools, I imagine it may be a fine line you have to walk sometimes about encouraging students to write about maybe a social issue or their social political positionality, like writing about class, poverty, race, gun violence, mass incarceration. Joe, I'm thinking about workshops in the prisons. How so many of the anthologies that I've read of the work that you've done in prisons or that you've published, the prisoners write very directly about being in prison. They're writing like kind of against the system in a way that they're not mincing words at all, and it's really refreshing. And there's a power to it. But I wonder if anyone wants to jump in and just kind of talk about how you direct students in terms of talking about social issues in your work. I know, Mark, you're very conscious about asking writers to write about specific issues, but yeah, that's a little all over the place. But if anyone wants to take that, yeah.
I have a
Go ahead,
comment on
Barbara.
that.
Yeah.
I often do workshops for writers who are indigenous. I've done workshops in Oklahoma and Alaska and other places where it's primarily indigenous people. Most of them don't think of themselves as writers to begin with, but they can address those issues that affect themselves and their communities very directly in their writing. And the things that come out of it are sometimes just astounding. When I was in Alaska in Fairbanks prison there, almost all of the men in my workshop were King Islanders. It was a little island that everybody was forced to leave and come to the mainland. And the King Islanders were these displaced people, often make up a large percentage of the prison population in certain parts of Alaska. And they began to write about what that meant to them, what that place was. It became more real to them. And they said, we're there now when we're writing these poems. We are returning to King Island. And in a sense, a poet can do that. A writer in prison can return or go to that place where their heart is. And it's not necessarily inside the prison, but it may address very directly the experience of the prison. I remember Jimmy Santiago Baca, one of his early poems about people coming to do writing workshops was sort of framed in that I thought they were coming to see the animals in the zoo. Then I realized they were coming to see me. And that realization through the writing workshop, I think, was a seminal moment in his development as a poet and as a person who could survive in this unsurvivable atmosphere that we often find people in prisons. In fact, I have to say that at least a dozen men and women I know who have published in anthologies died in prison, and sometimes under very brutal circumstances. But it's also a path to survival.
Thanks. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so every couple months, I will invite participants to write about something that people say they shouldn't talk about, politics or religion or a certain issue of justice. But in general, about 1/3 of the writing prompts and exercises that we invite people into are social or justice related. So only about 1/3, because I really want to give people room to breathe. And what often happens is what happened yesterday. Uh, a lady chose to write about a prompt that I described as write a versus prompt, cats versus dogs, rock versus country, good versus evil, that sort of thing. And so she um, began her piece writing about cats, how cats are better than dogs. And she wrote about how she has a lot of cats in her house. And then she remembered in her piece the time that she was living in her stepdad's trailer after having traveled from another state, and there were cats everywhere. And then she remembered in her piece hearing a car pull up and knowing some people were about to snatch her elementary school aged daughter. And then in her piece, she wrote about her son finding a gun and pointing it at herself. And then in her piece, she talked about wishing she'd known more about life and that she was about to be homeless. And that all started with write about cats or write a versus piece about cats. And I found that that's important to really not push people too hard, and really just give them space to be people. And it's going to surface. The
Mhm.
those justice issues and social issues will come up when they're ready.
I know. Oh, huh.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay. Yeah, I had a situation once where a student wrote an incredible poem, very moving about her father in prison, and it was very negative about the prisoners and not the prisoners, but the prison. Um, and one of the community leaders came into the classroom when she read it, and he was very upset. He did not want that poem to be read at the event. And I was kind of upset. So I kind of compromised and said she can read it in the classroom because the kids were, she was an older student and, without the real young ones there. So we compromised on that. But in terms of publishing it, I called the father. He was out of prison, but I called him and said, is this okay for her are you okay with this poem being published? And he said, yes. So we published it anyway. So it was kind of a tricky situation, but it's an incredible poem. I'm really glad that I published it.
Oh yeah, thank you, Barbara. I'd love to if you can share that with me too sometime, maybe
Okay, I
on a
will.
photo. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that one time when I was working on some of the Attica stuff, I was reading Joe's anthology from Comstock, and the first poem in that anthology is absolutely incredible by A. Jabbar. And I wrote Joe, or I don't remember if we talked on the phone, right? And I said, like, how do you do this? Like this, like I would not be surprised if I found this poem in Amiri Baraka's archive, right? It was a stunning, stunning poem. And like, what was the, I was like, well, what prompt did you use or whatever? Like, how did this political poem happen? And he was like, people in my workshop were transferred from Attica. Some people were recovering from gunshot wounds. Of course, these were political poems, right? And so that was just, I always remember that story that Joe told me for like the conditions of life produce this in our art, right? For everybody. And it happens in all our workshops too.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I mean, I'm just gonna echo what Mark and Matt said about like it sort of naturally comes out, and I think I try to approach students with prompts similarly in that um, I give them these open-ended prompts, and I instead of trying to direct them somewhere, because they often just like find that thing that's political. I try to direct them to like writing in specificity and with detail, and with through that something else greater always often emerges. Um, and so and I think also too, because some students have mentioned to me that they don't like when they're like our like they're concerned about like sending work out to lit mags is that certain lit mags, like national lit mags, will want their prison stories. And so I want to make sure that I'm not giving them like certain particular prompts that if they want to write about prison, which they often do, and I just want them to write uh, with specificity so I can like imagine myself wherever it is, whether it's like they're commenting on prison life or about childhood, and a lot of times those things are tied up, and I try to just make sure that I ask them about writing with like imagery and detail and things like that. Um, that's how I try to like I guess navigate it, not to like Matt said, push them towards it because they'll go that route usually.
Great. I'm going to ask one more group question here, and then maybe we can transition into sharing some exercises that are fruitful. Um, I'm curious about how you develop trust among members of the classroom. So I know this can be a challenge in prison settings, in prison classrooms that I've taught in. Sometimes the men that I've taught were they kept things close to their chest. They didn't want to share things that could almost I don't know, create leverage for other people in the room outside of the classroom. Like how much I share here, I make myself vulnerable. That information I share can be, I don't know, used against me seems, yeah. But anyway, so I've run into this in my own work as well. But how do you build that sense of honesty, but also trust where people feel comfortable enough to say true things about themselves in a group where they don't know everybody there? Especially because so many of these workshops are time-based. We've got 8 weeks, we've got 12 weeks. And I love that some of these programs we're talking about, they meet weekly, like Matt's, and I know Mark, the Worker Writer School meets almost, like on a weekly basis. So there isn't some kind of ending to the program. But other ideas for how you can kind of jumpstart that sense of intimacy and trust in a writing workshop.
Can I speak? Two things. First of all, I should point out there was a magazine called Lemon Creek Gold that published the inmates in that Alaska prison, Lemon Creek Correctional Facility. If anyone wants to look it up, I think it's no longer being published. The second thing is one thing I always did was I exposed myself. I would share what I was feeling and writing very honestly. And I would say, you don't have to do that, but I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking right now in a poem, and I will share it with you. And I think that you have to be, in many cases, not just a mentor, but also a participant, especially when you're working with people in prison, because in prison, people have developed these various mechanisms for survival, including cynicism, which is also true often. I've worked with people who are veterans who said I couldn't care about anybody in my unit because they might be dead tomorrow. And breaking through that barrier sometimes means you have to be a bit fearless yourself and risk it and risk failing, and not saying this is a perfect poem I'm sharing with you. What do you think of it? And let them critique me if they want to, but also tell people this is a safe space. So you don't have to share what you write, but you can share what you write. And somehow I've always found, no matter what prison it is, that it reaches this point where people begin to trust each other and to begin to feel like a community in a setting that is deliberately meant to separate people. Prisons deliberately separate people into ethnic groups, into specialist groups, into groups that are set up against each other. One prison I worked at, they wanted to have an all inmates day. Oh, no, no, you've got to have, a Puerto Rican day. You've got to have a black day. You've got to have an Irish day. And that idea of separation is something I think that we as teachers in any setting can help to break down by making people feel like this is a community of sharing and trust.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody else want to jump in on that about developing trust in the classroom?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I like what he said. I mean, I would share my own poetry, but I would also, when I picked poems that were models, I tried to pick ones that were more vulnerable and that opened up. um, by, and then I sometimes would read poems by other students that I had that were around the same age, which really also helped. But it took a lot of time. It took me, I had to ask for an hour and a half with these kids to build not just the trust, but the language and everything else, you know, layered upon layer. But also in the schools, the problem is that the kids are so geared to taking a test that they have closed themselves off, and they will say, "What is it that you want me to write?" And I'll say, "No, no, no. You have to come up with what you write. It's about you. It comes from you." It sometimes would take me a long time, you know, maybe a couple days to sort of and then once it hits them that it's about them and they can write, you know, their own feelings and with all these models, then they're able to do it. But and in the past, you know, years, it was taking longer and longer because at least in our state, the state test was being so emphasized all the time. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Lorraine.
Yeah, well, this is a different I can't answer to the classroom because you know, I'm not a teacher. But one of the way that Mark, we went on a retreat upstate. He took me, and that was just like so amazing. And during the retreat, there are times when we're around the table and everyone just like let go. Just we're crying and you know, because the stories were like so raw and different, and there were stories that were not shared in the workshop that we normally, so it was a different setting. And actually at the end of the retreat was just really wonderful, and at the end of the workshop, the retreat, we were asked to give our feedback. So I just want to read just a little of the retreat. May I? Okay. And I just read a few paragraphs. When I think of a writing retreat, a vision of the wealthy, the famous, the New York Times bestselling authors, the novelists and playwright, all of those writers screenshot throughout my mind. Call me naive. However, I've never been to a writing retreat. I'm a nanny, for crying out loud. Thus, my expectation of the Workers' Writers School retreat was a wait and see kind of vibe, a pessimistic demeanor to say the least. But I got the shock of my life. I was transformed into an optimist. I found confidence on a sheet of paper driven by a ballpoint pen. The Worker Writers School, founded and directed by Mark Noack, made us into a believer, believing and knowing that everyone can write, knowing we're all worthy, knowing we all have the ability to share our great stories, sharing our narrative, no matter what our ethnicity or economic status, knowing despite light action camera, we all are wealthy in thoughts. Of the numerous events that I have participated in last fall, my visit with the Workers' Writers School was the most memorable. I I was uplifted and I still am. So I just share that.
Thank you so much, Lorraine.
Thank you.
That sounds great. And yeah, that totally makes sense. That's a way to bring a classroom community together and develop trust and a sense of honesty among one another to take a trip together and experience something new for the first time all together. So I'm glad that you added that to the conversation. Yeah,
I
Joe, go
have to
ahead.
say thank you
You were
because
being described in there, Joe. I don't know if you caught that.
she brought that back to me, and it was such a wonderful experience. I have to say at this point, thank you, Mark, for all you've done. And as a matter of fact, I feel honored to be part of this session with old friends and old friends I haven't met before. So it's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Lots of love here. I want to give us a chance to each share an exercise or prompt that you use in your classrooms.
I do. I love the fact that haiku is being mentioned so often because I love haiku. I've been writing at least one every day for the last 5 years, attempting to write one, I should say. And one exercise I give is to tell people to try to write something which is in the form of a haiku, that 575 form, and to include something that mentions the season, but also to make it timely in terms of where you are. And this was one that I got years ago, and I'm ashamed to say it was in a workshop, which I did not keep the name and address of everybody who was in that workshop. So this will be anonymous. But I mentioned this already. It's very simple. It's this. Am I in prison? Not when I'm holding this pen. That's when spring begins.
I will share this blood bottom shoes. It's and came out of our workshop also, and all the stuff that was happening during the corona time. And this is blood bottom shoes. Have to go downtown also. Have to unite, join my bloodlines. Have to touch their black and blue blood vessels. Have to profess war cries together. No more shopping for red polka dot dresses. No more shopping for blood bottom shoes. No more shopping for straight jackets. No more shopping for bags with lengthy horsewhip and iron buckles. Have to retain money. Secure money. Secure money to buy back my black brother. Retain money to buy back my father. Buy back my uncle. Buy back my nephew. Have to retain money to buy back my black son. Want their holistic black bodies. Want bodies without broken backs. Want bodies without fractured ribs. Want bodies without blood stains. Want bodies without bullets. Bodies unharmed. Bodies untouched. Whole bodies. Bodies without splinters. Bodies with intact limbs. Bodies that are not lynched. Want bodies that still have its jugular unhinged. Want to buy back my black son's soul. No longer will they peel my black son charcoal skin. Want to buy back my black son's ashes. Want to buy back my black son's son. Want to buy back my black son's body. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, remember Lorraine said she didn't know if she was a poet earlier. I just want to point that fact out. One of the things I always think about is this, we had them as guests at the Worker Writer School, one of our things in New York City, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, and their book Undercommons and their notion of study, right? And fugitive study and study. And so when we were working on the coronavirus haiku book, that was during the pandemic. We were like this on Zoom, and we just studied absolutely everything in the haiku tradition, from Basho and Isa to Japanese American internment camp haiku. The poet Evie Shockley came and visited us, wrote about her haiku, Sonia Sanchez haiku, et cetera, et cetera. We also had a visit from Hiroaki Sato, who I think is the probably greatest translator in the US of haiku. And one of the books he did recently, we talked a lot about how poetry rises up out of certain moments in our lives. And this is a really great book called So Happy to See Cherry Blossoms, haiku from the year of the great earthquake and tsunami in Fukushima after the nuclear disaster in 2011. And one of the things I love about this book is the way that it's organized on the page. It has the writer's name, age, where they lived, has the poem in Japanese translated into English, and then gives the writer a little like sentence or two to say a word or two about their poem, and has a little footnote, right? And so we get this whole, it's not just someone approaching a haiku as if it's in thin air, right? But instead, this one gives all of it. So I'll just read this poem. From Shiga Atsuko, 78 years old, from Minamisoma, Fukushima. Here's the poem first, the haiku. Where I've come to flee the radiation, dandelions yellow. where I've come to flee the radiation, dandelions yellow. Shiga says of this poem, I had to evacuate suddenly, and I came to live in Sendai where my oldest son lives. Days were anxious, but I was soothed and encouraged when I saw dandelions by the road. And then there's a footnote for the American or English language readership, particularly American, I think. The seasonal word, haiku always has the seasonal word, the seasonal word tampopo or dandelion. In Japan, the flowering plant has none of these negative images it has among those with lawns and gardens in the United States. Children love to blow its seed head. And so I love the way that the writer and the translator provide us with this whole apparatus for the poem in Japanese, in English, comments from the person who wrote it, and a footnote for American readership as well. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful book. So happy to see cherry blossoms.
Thank you, Mark. Let's hear from Matt.
Yeah, so there's a prompt that we often do called "Homelessness Is," and it's inspired by a prompt that I first encountered in Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg. I think her prompt was "I remember," and it's essentially to write a series of sentences that starts with those words. So people are invited to write "Homelessness is" sentences, and this is actually the first "Homelessness is" piece that we ever published by David. Homelessness is falling asleep at McDonald's. Homelessness is being exhausted all the time. Homelessness is waking up refreshed and lucid on one of those rare mornings when you found a place to sleep undisturbed. Homelessness is being too tired to give a flying fart, so you lay your head wherever you feel safe. Homelessness is making valiant, almost magical attempts at blending in with your surroundings and with society's ridiculous expectations. Homelessness is the martial art of honing your skills as a hustler so that you may make a decent living for someone living on the streets by any means necessary. Homelessness is doing anything to make an honest buck, even if it means compromising your self-respect.
Thank you, Matt. I love that list poem. Barbara, do you have exercise you want to share?
Yeah, I think I'm going to share this one. Sometimes I would go into the music classes or the art classes because it was hard to get into the classrooms. And I was able to bring this jazz violinist, John Blake Jr., to my school, and that was a big deal. And anyway, so I did this, the prompt, it was a music prompt, and then I have a poem to go with it. The prompt was, think about the city, the neighborhood you live in, or something else important to you that you have strong feelings about. So I leave it very open-ended. Write a poem inspired by music in some way, and then I would play music. And I played it by this violinist, jazz violinist. And then underneath it, I always had these little bullets that were like, make the poem musical by using sound, rhythm, repetition, and a strong voice. So, I was a teacher, so it was very, that way. But it was helpful to do that because then the kids really remembered to do it. So this is a poem that one of my students wrote to that prompt, and she was one of the winners that went to Washington. It's called New Beginnings. Jazz is like me skipping rocks through the sea, floating to the moon, dreaming of being alone in the dark with only starlight to guide me. I am wishing for someone new to show me the way of hope, the way of happiness. I am sitting watching the sunlight like a bird watches her eggs, like a museum watches its diamonds, like the ocean skipping rocks back to me. But only I can see the joy of the sea's waves moving through the music, the violin moving to a new beat. Cheyenne.
I love that. The museum watching its diamonds.
Yeah.
That's going to stick with me. Thank you, Barbara. And Michael.
Yeah, I mean, so I have dozens of prompts, and I think it's more about the approach. I try to I'll give like a prompt and give students like 10 to 12 minutes to write, and then I won't explain the prompt, and it's super specific. And then I give them, they finish that, and then I give them another prompt, 10, 12 minutes, and then another prompt. For example, I pulled up three, like I would give a prompt that says, what grew too tall? And then they can't ask questions, they just have to write. And then the next prompt is like a memory of heat. And then the next prompt after that is what came looking for me. And I'll put in the group chat or the chat like one of those the what came looking for me. There was a poem that came out of that from a student, and it won the AWP Intro to Journals Award. So it was published, and then Academy of American Poets picked it up too. So I'll put that in the chat. And that's just kind of how I end up. I feel like the pressurizedness of it works.
Wow. Excellent. Yeah. Everyone can find that poem in the chat there on Poets or
Um,
excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, can I quickly mention, Matt talk about Natalie Goldberg, and
Hmm.
have her book Three Simple Lines, which is a haiku. And one of my favorite quote from her is, "I can't take a step outside without stepping on a haiku." So I just mentioned that quickly because Matt mentioned it. The
I
book
love
is
that.
it's great.
So we have just a couple minutes left, and I do want to get to some questions from the audience. Sejal said she came across Joseph Bruchac's anthology of Asian American poets, Breaking Silence, back when she was in high school, when she was looking for writing by Asian American writers in the library. She's wondering how, Joe, you came to edit that anthology and to thank you for doing so. That's pretty cool.
The way I came to edit the anthology was kind of roundabout. I was publishing a number of Asian American writers from various Asian American communities in my magazine. And I said, why don't we get together and do an Asian American poetry anthology? So we started working on it, myself and several different people. And finally, the consensus was, we want you to edit it so no one will criticize us for leaving out anyone in our community. So I ended up editing the magazine, but I can't take credit for it. It was the anthology. I really was helped by so many different people who were people in the anthology that I have to say, like Garrett Hongo, for example, and numerous others, that it really came out of a kind of a communal effort, which is to me kind of interesting because I think sometimes the most interesting things happen when you're working with other people and you're helping them to share their energy.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Sejal, for that question. That's so cool. Um, Anybody else? So we did have a question from Wendy Lowe asking about cities doing poetry on transit these days. And Mark jumped in that Flowchart Foundation has been doing poems on large posters in Hudson, New York, inside the Amtrak station. I feel like this is a great method for getting poetry out into the community in kind of a direct way, like Mark was saying before about projections and other ways of making poetry a public art. So yeah, if anybody else has ideas about poetry on transit, throw those in the chat. I know that Columbia, Lancaster, PA, in Lancaster County, Columbia, the town there, there's a group called Word Hive that got a grant last year to put poems on the side of buses. Or no, they may have been, I think it was a billboard actually. Yeah, they were doing a contest for anyone could submit a poem of a certain length and they were putting them on billboards. So another way of getting the work out there.
No, it was buses. It was buses.
Oh, it was buses. Okay,
Yeah,
right,
it was
great.
buses.
We've got a question. Oh, go ahead, Joe. Joe Bruchac.
I was going to say the Adirondack Center for Writing in Saranac Lake, New York, has been doing a really interesting thing for several years now, which is poetry in public places. The various merchants in the town agreed to put a poem up on their window, and the poems are all submitted openly. Anyone can submit a poem, and there's no critique. It's just you submit your poem, we'll put it on a poster, we'll put it in a window, so you can walk down the street in Saranac Lake and read dozens and dozens of poems, each one by a different poet. So I think that's yet another way we can have poetry in public places.
Yeah. I have a lot of love for that program. I worked on it for a couple of years and helped to bring that program. Now poems are all in the windows in Saranac Lake and in Plattsburgh and in Malone and St. Lawrence County. So yeah, there are so much love for poetry in the Adirondacks. And
Bring it to
Joe's
your
Joe's
community.
right.
Offer it as something your community can do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a very simple project. Yeah, we love it. Um, Let me see. I do have one last question here. I think I'll probably close this out. So Neil in the chat asked, what fills up your own creative stores these days? So we're all talking here about our capacity as teachers, and but you personally, what's getting you inspired to write personally? If anybody wants to jump in on that, you're welcome to. Go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
Let me share a poem that comes out of the current mood that we're in this country, but is actually a haiku, a series of haikus, 5 in general. 5. There's rhyme in it too. This is it. On the quiet lawn where the snow melted away, all the tracks are gone. But in memory, traces of what was remains beyond what we see. All that once was here is remembered by the soil and will reappear. Flowers and soft rain dancing to the flute of spring will bless us again. Traveler, just wait. Despite all our confusion, seasons outlast hate.
Yeah, nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
Love this. I'm gonna just do one more check to make sure. Oh yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I guess I would say a creative tank filler is participating in the weekly writing workshop as an equal member is one of the most delightful times of my week. And I also think that that sort of speaks to the question of how to build trust. Um, Everyone in the room is a participant, and I've had to turn people away that just wanted to spectate.
Mm.
Mm.
Excellent. I love that. So we just reached 8:30, and I'm the kind of person who's like, told people we're going to 8:30. We're not gonna keep them here too much longer, but I will make sure in case there's one last burning question, if anyone's got one, or anyone on the panel that wants to say anything just to close us out in a minute here. Um, and if not, then I'll probably bid you all adieu. Again, I've put a link in the chat to a survey that we have. It would be great if everyone could take a chance to answer that. It's a pretty short survey, but it'll help us as we continue to plan panels like this. And also, of course, we're selling books through Ampersand today. You'll find social poetics as well as a bunch of other books by poets who are doing socially engaged poetry or politically engaged poetry. You'll find anthologies of prison writing projects and all kinds of other stuff, as well as books by the authors who are on the panel here tonight. So I want to thank everyone again. And yeah, I will send out an email that just has some links of things that were mentioned tonight, as well as to remind people about the survey. And we'll share a video recording with everyone who was registered at least. So yeah. And yes, I'll do my best to save the chat. I do think that it records the chat for us and stores it. So I'll get that out, Wendy. Appreciate having everybody chiming in here in the chat. Thanks for all the love. And yeah, I think we'll end there. But thank you all so much. Matt,
Thank
Lorraine,
you.
Mike,
Thank
Mark,
you
Joe, thank you
Bye.
all. Barbara, this is very, very lovely. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
All
so
right.
much. Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you
Keep
so
in
much.
touch too.
Thank you.
Olioni, I return good to you
Well.
all. Olioni.
Yeah, there
Thank
we go.
you.